My name is John Briggs. I'm a partner at the law firm of Axinn Veltrop Harkrider. I'm also a founding editor of an online publication called the Chesapeake Observer, for which I write a column roughly every 6 weeks called Thinking About Things. My Navy experience is indirectly, in some ways quite directly, led me to the law. I spent 4 years in college, then I spent basically 4 years in the military, the Navy, as a young naval officer. And one of my jobs after a couple of years was a legal officer in the Navy. And naval legal officers have no legal training. They just are thrown into defending or prosecuting people who are guilty of some small crime. It might be drunkenness, being late, AWOL, something like that. But I found that I had a good aptitude for representing people on one or the other side of the justice system. And based on that experience and not knowing what else to do, I decided to go to law school when I got out of the Navy. By and large, I've been a competition lawyer most of my 50 years in the practice of law. That is antitrust law. And the area of competition law includes monopolies, price fixing, illegal price fixing, mergers and acquisitions, all kinds of regulatory work before the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice involving mostly large but not always large companies. The case I'm most proud of in a way, not just because of the result of the case, but because of its impact on my career and my life generally, was a case involving Rockwell International, who came to me in early 2001, wanting to arrange a meeting with the Department of Justice to complain about the merger of General Electric and Honeywell. At the time, that was the largest merger in the history of mergers in the world. And I was very well known at the Department of Justice. I had been, a few years earlier, chairman of the 10,000 lawyer American Bar Association antitrust law section. So I thought it would be effortless to get a meeting at the Department of Justice. Well, it turned out not to be effortless. It turned out to be impossible. And I had the embarrassing job of going back to the client, in this case the chairman of the board, and the chief executive officer, and the general counsel, and tell them I could not get a meeting with anybody. They said they had already spoken to somebody from Rockwell on the telephone. We had no idea who that was. And there was nothing more that we could say that would matter. This infuriated the company, and they asked me in the same phone call what I could do. And I said I did not know what I could do that would be successful, but I was 100% sure that I could arrange for a meeting in Brussels with the head of the European antitrust authorities. To make a long story short, I did get such a meeting. I spent months in Brussels working with the competition authorities there. And after several months, on July 4, 2001, they stopped the merger, prohibited it, between General Electric and Honeywell, which was a hinge moment for my entire career and my life, because it resulted in my opening up an office in Brussels for my law firm, becoming a practicing European lawyer in a sense, and getting clients in Europe and Asia and all over the world to handle their matters not only in the United States but also in Europe. So it was a big, as I say, hinge moment. I tended to write an article almost every year for about 50 years on legal matters. But I stopped doing that a couple of years ago. And instead, I began writing for the Chesapeake Observer, which I was a founding editor of, in late 2019, and continuing to write for them. And in fact, I'm publishing now as a book a collection of essays written from December 2019 through December 2022. A very interesting period of time, and it turns out that my essays are almost like a diary of of the events beginning with the pandemic, the isolation and the sort of chaos and change of lifestyle for everybody of the pandemic. And then in 2020, the various many events of 2020 that were consequential and caused me to write a lot. The most consequential, of course, being the murder of George Floyd, the aftermath of that, the commencement of the Black Lives Movement, the violence in America in the cities, particularly during much of 2020, followed by the election, of course, in November, which brought us a new administration, followed by the new administration's decision to leave Afghanistan in the catastrophic way that it did, the onset of inflation, the collapse of various segments of the economy, the rise in unemployment, which is only now beginning to become substantially mitigated, followed by the invasion in early 2022 of Ukraine by Russia, and before that, the takeover of Hong Kong by China. All those things followed by the midterm elections of last year that were very consequential in many ways. And so it's been a hugely interesting time to be writing, and my essays happen to capture that 3-year period of economic, political, social unrest, change, and so forth. So I continue to write these kinds of essays every few weeks. Mentoring is, to me, something that I learned how to do of necessity in my time in the Navy. As a young naval officer, it was not possible to be promoted to the next highest position without certifying that my replacement was better or as good as I was. And that meant I had to be sure that my successor was well trained and ready to take over whatever I had been doing. That turned out to be an extraordinarily useful lesson to learn that has stayed with me until this day. And when I became a lawyer, I sort of converted that view to a desire to be surrounded by, to hire younger lawyers who were smarter than me, or at least who I thought were smarter than me, and who would accept great responsibility quickly. And so my whole philosophy of managing other people was something begun in the Navy and continues to this day, and that is simply hire the brightest people you can find, make them do the best work they can do, let them do the best work they can do, praise them for it in public, criticize them only in private, and give them a long leash, and they will succeed way more often than not. And that's all about, it's mentoring, not just because I want to be a good guy, it's mentoring because my entire career in the Navy and since the Navy has depended on achieving things through other people. People can achieve very little all by themselves. They need other people to help them. And mentoring people, a lot of different words for mentoring: training people, embracing good people, educating people, all is under the broad banner of mentoring. I consider it central to the way I have practiced law forever. There is one experience that taught me a lot, and it had to do with my very first case I ever had as a young lawyer. Right nearby here, it involved a company from Baltimore, Black & Decker, and I was the only associate on the case. I was a second-year associate, which means I had 2 years of experience, roughly, or less than 3 years of experience as a lawyer. Not much experience. And the case was being handled for Black & Decker by a senior partner at my law firm, who's now dead. But on the first day of trial, he had to cross-examine the government's first witness, who was an important witness. And this man sat back in his chair with a 3-ring notebook, put his feet up on the table in the courtroom, and started asking questions. The judge, C. Stanley Blair, very, very good judge, looked at this man and said, "Mr. So-and-so," I won't mention his name, in this courtroom we normally stand up at the podium when we cross-examine witnesses. And this man looked at the judge and said, "Oh, Your Honor, this is the way we do it at the Federal Trade Commission." He had come from the Federal Trade Commission in Washington. At the next break, the senior legal officer, the chief legal officer of Black & Decker, walked up to me in the corridor outside the hearing of anybody else, and he said, "John, you tell your boss," it was the client relationship man, not the guy I was describing at the table, "that I don't want to see that man with his feet on the table in this courthouse ever again, as long as I live, if that's possible. But in any event, I don't want to ever see him in this courthouse representing Black & Decker, ever." So I went off and reported this to the senior partner who was in charge of the relationship with Black & Decker. His name was Dave. And he looked at me and he said, "John, I'm sure you'll do a fine job trying this case." And I did do a fine job trying the case. I lost 40 or 50 pounds in less than 6 weeks. Couldn't sleep. I was so nervous. I couldn't eat because my stomach was so nervous. But what I learned was, number one, that I was very lucky in a strange way. I didn't want this man to be fired. I was working for him. But he was an embarrassment at the same time. And the most important thing I suppose I've learned, and that I tell other young lawyers, is that you never know when opportunity will come your way. You never know when you will be told to be in charge of something. And you have to be ready to be in charge of whatever it is that you're doing. So that was another hinge moment in my career, the first one. It was just an incredibly important experience. I was the youngest lawyer at my firm ever to have tried a merger case in 1975 or 76. But after I had been practicing law for 40 years, and while I was still practicing law, indeed I'm still practicing law right now, I decided to teach a course with a good friend of mine who had been in charge of the antitrust division of the Department of Justice. His name is Don Baker. And he and I taught a course for 9 years at the George Washington Law School on international competition. And it turned out to be just an extraordinarily good decision for both of us. We enjoyed teaching together. We did it for 9 years. And we had about 12 students each year. We each hired some of those students to work for us at our different law firms. So we mentored them in a sense as students. And it kept us on our toes. It was very enjoyable and professionally satisfying. Both for us, I think, and I know for most, if not all, of the students. I would tell my younger self 2 things. Don't work quite so hard. I mean, don't work quite so many hours every day and every week and every month. There's time, leave time for personal life and children and grandchildren. I think I failed at that in my first 10 years particularly. And the second thing I would tell myself was that, and I tell this to the children and to other people, that patience is a great virtue. Don't be too big a hurry to achieve whatever you're trying to achieve. Be ready first before you get too ambitious.